While it may be obvious in shows like C-Lab and Harvey Birdman, there's other less obvious examples of Adult Swim shows using old Hanna-Barbera assets, especially in their older stuff, and it can go even beyond just simple cameos. For example, in Aqua Teen Hunger Force, they reuse backgrounds from old Hanna-Barbera cartoons often. Speaking of which, the plot for that show, the non-existent plot, was made up so that show could get greenlit and aired. And what they made up was just the typical, oh, they fight monsters and they can do detecting, and the teen part from their name actually comes from the idea of feeding hungry teenagers. You can see remnants of this mostly in the show's intro, which is why it is the way it is. And after a few episodes, they just dumped on that to do what they really want instead, which was the random nonsense the show's known for. So yeah, just lie to the executives and get your cavemen and robots and everything visiting the household instead. This house has people in it by itself would have been an entry higher up with too many cooks and unedited footage of a bear. However, I feel like it's impossible to bring it up without mentioning everything else revolving around it too. So I decided to just make this its only entry, and it's deeper down. Surprisingly, despite the clip being very popular, a lot of people who watch it still don't seem to really know about all of this. And what it is that they made like a website for it, connecting to it in universe, much like what they did with unedited footage of a bear. But there's way more to this one than that one. And once you go over there, you'll find a whole entire splooge of different information, just like recordings that you can read of the characters speaking. And there's games there, and there's whole entire other clips that are just their own weird things, such as the clay building one, which was a thing that's watched in universe, and that's a whole entire big nonsense thing that connects to other things with them rambling on about a non-existent disease. And there's all this other subplot and subtext things, such as just the family's dysfunctionality, the dad being a giant man-child, I forget their names, and being obsessed with boom cats, and the mom crying over characters dying in her books, the family eating clay pizza. There's just so much to it that I can't just sit down and explain forever. I highly recommend watching Nightmind's video on it, aka Nick Nocturne. He goes through basically all of this and does a very good job of it too. So yeah, go check that out. If you're watching this, then you have to be familiar with the William Street logo. And you probably also know the nice soothing noise that it produces, followed by the skull. But it's actually known where that comes from, and it just so happens to be from another ending logo too. It's one that precedes it by a few decades, and it's by VII Limited. And in that logo you see a guy hammering in giant nail, and the ringing produced by the hammer banging is what makes the noise that we all know. Here's where we start to touch on personal feelings and such that go beyond the surface level. And as you can see from here, there are some people who prefer to pretend that Rick and Morty only had 2 seasons. This is due to a drop in quality in the show, and while the meta regarding it may seem like the most obvious reason, particularly the frustrating fan base that occurred after Season 2 once 3 premiered. And that's not exactly the only reason that's given to them. Other things include, as I said before, a drop in quality, and some people criticize the characters becoming more mean or stupid, and a lot of the writing feeling like that's done by the edgy, pretentious middle schoolers who helped ruin the show's image. Other things include behind the scenes, such as Justin Roiland just sounding more dead inside for other things, as well as his overall shtick just getting really old and oversaturated, and Dan Harmon acting more and more like a complete jackass. There's a lot of things that people miss regarding the older seasons and compared to now, but it's a whole entire big topic they could probably hear from other people who feel this way. Similarly, before this, people prefer that Season 4 of the Boondocks never happened. It was a revival season, much like Dexter's Lab got, it came out a few years after the show was already quote-unquote over. And like that too, there's like original members of the staff missing, and it led to a drop in quality by many people. Just really unfunny, unmeaningful, unnecessary episodes that are just nonsense or boring or dumb is most likely the criticism that you're going to hear from many others. This was originally going to be a bit higher because you probably hear it vocally more often, but since Rick and Morty is a bit newer and this died down a bit, just in terms of people talking about it, and Rick and Morty has become more topical, that one is just right above this. I already talked about the interview process and Eric Andre, and now it's time to do Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which less people have looked into. And as you know, there were celebrity interviews on that since it was a quote-unquote talk show in the loosest way possible. And what they would do is that they would obviously have them in a separate room since the actual set isn't real, sorry to burst your bubble. And they would be in this dark room practically alone, maybe with like a recording of questions that doesn't even have anything to do with what Space Ghost is asking them on the actual cartoon. And they would go ahead and answer those. Then after that, they would put them into production and have Space Ghosts say completely different things, and they'll mix up their answers around and anything to make the celebrity sound just insane as possible. It's a pretty funny idea, and it's what led to the show's stupid absurdity a lot. Originally, this entry was only Pee-wee's Playhouse in the Iceberg image. However, a lot of people on Reddit mentioned other shows that were weird for them to air. And a lot of these had to do with like joked up animes or just like really unfitting other shows they acquired. And a lot of those were brought up, so I just included other odd shows aired alongside this. However, I still think Pee-wee's Playhouse like takes the cake for this. Is the main highlight of it, because I still feel like that's like the weirdest, and like it's also somehow the one that like nobody still talks about anymore. Like I hear the other shows that were mentioned brought up more, like Super Milk Chan. But yeah, it's this live action little kid show that they started airing in about 2007, and it just seems like a lot of people have forgotten about it or don't even really mention it anymore. It's strangely fitting for Adult Swim to do something like this, because it's just so odd. It's like Snake when he was at Super Smash Brothers. But yeah, for that, it's all the way down here on the Iceberg. And that's about it for this layer. It's a shorter one. It's sort of like beforehand where like Bridge is more once, but this one's a bit more dark and personal. And it's a good appetizer of the much more stranger and deeper stuff that's going to be coming after this, so stay tuned. It's going to be longer too.